things were happening, people were moving. This is kind of a doozy. I'm tough, I can handle it. That dang zinger. Girl bosses, assassins, mystery. So this was really good. Yep, just another Tuesday. Hi. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I should be packing to move because I move in 24 days. Don't even know where I'm moving yet, but I'm moving. My current lease ends in 24 days, so should be packing. Don't wanna. So I'm gonna tell you about the books that I read in May and June instead. So the first book that I have to tell you about is actually a DNF. It is The Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle. I had really high hopes for this one. Victor LaValle is supposed to be sort of a literary horror darling. This just didn't do it for me. So this is about a man who is arrested and taken to a psychiatric ward against his will, even though he is very clearly not insane. You basically follow him into this mental health institution and he meets a bunch of other of the patients. On his first night there, he's visited by a terrifying creature with the body of an old man and the head of a bison who nearly kills him before being hustled away by the hospital staff. It's no delusion. The other patients confirm that a hungry devil roams the hallways when the sun goes down. Okay, fine. That's a very exciting, intriguing synopsis. But when I was listening to this on audiobook, which is narrated by the author, when I was listening to this on audiobook, I got to the part where there's that first scare where this crazy, awful monster comes into his room, and it was just like not scary. I felt no tension. I felt no fear. I felt no pull to actually listen to the rest of it. So I got about a quarter of the way through and I was like, this is supposed to be the scary event that really kicks everything off. And if that's not really doing it for me, then I think this probably just isn't for me. So I DNF'd it. But if this sounds like something like the actual literal devil stalking the halls of a mental health institution and this ragtag group of people having to try and fight him, then you should give it a try. But for me, it just didn't work. The next thing I listened to also ended up being kind of a doozy, but it wasn't bad enough that I DNF'd it. I did read or listen to it all the way through. This is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This follows a young woman who is speaking to someone who is going to basically write a memoir for her of her life, because when she was a child, her older sister was reportedly possessed by a demon, and it got so bad that her parents actually brought in a reality TV crew to document everything, because of course the family of the possessed girl, they're very poor, they're trying to make ends meet, so they bring in this reality TV crew. Things go wrong, as you can probably imagine, and horror ensues. So now it's many years later and this younger sister is relaying the story of what really happened. So this definitely is the trope of, is it mental illness versus is it actually demonic possession? There's a lot of themes of religious oppression because the father is very extreme Christian to the point where he seems like he may be a danger to the girls at certain points. I think that this could have been really great, but the audiobook was just really cheesy. There was also these intermittent blog posts that I just thought added nothing to the story and were really just annoying. The only reason I kept listening is because I just wanted to know, is she actually possessed or is she just mentally ill? I will say the ending was worth it. So if you're reading this and you're also felt like me where you're this feels kind of like a slog, I don't know if I want to finish, I did really like the ending. And the ending is really the only thing that saved it for me. I still ended up giving it 2.75. 3 stars out of 5. I don't ever need to reread it. I don't need to have a copy for my personal collection. For me, it just didn't really work. The next audiobook that actually became available was The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. So I kind of begrudgingly started this one because I was A Head Full of Ghosts wasn't really my cup of tea. But then I was okay, I'll give Paul Tremblay another chance. So since listening to the audiobook, I've actually picked up a physical copy, but I did, when I read this for my May June wrap up, I did listen to this for my first read through. So this follows a pair of husbands who go to a cabin with their daughter Wen, and they are visited by a group of strangers who basically invade their home and are claiming that the apocalypse is happening, and the only way to stop it is for someone in their family to make a sacrifice. So they have to sacrifice one of the 3. So this was very intriguing. This felt like a very different book than Head Full of Ghosts. It almost felt like it was written by a different author. And I mean that in a good way, because I really didn't like Head Full of Ghosts, but I ended up really liking Cabin at the End of the World. This immediately sucked me in, and I thought the pacing of this was a lot better. It was a lot more snappy, and like things were happening, people were moving. So it is a very plot-driven novel, I would say, but it also had great characters. And I thought that the character development and sort of like the interactions between the characters was really interesting. I really liked the audiobook on this one as well, because there were, like I said, different characters, and I think that their different voices really helped make them feel more distinct. The villains were very interesting to me. I am a lover of villains, and I especially love complex, interesting villains. So for this group of like intruders to feel so distinct and so fleshed out and so complex, it was really, really fun to read. This book had really similar vibes to the movie The Invitation. So I would say if you liked the movie The Invitation, you should read this, and vice versa. If you liked the book, you should really watch the movie The Invitation. It's definitely relying on that trope of like, you don't know what the truth is, you don't know who's telling the truth. So yes, themes of home invasion, potentially apocalyptic. Are these people crazy? Are they telling the truth? Is this like, what's going on? I highly, highly, highly recommend. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I listened to My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russel. Trigger warning, heavy book. Definitely check all trigger warnings before you start this, because this is kind of a doozy. Not an easy read. So this follows a young girl named Vanessa. It's the harrowing tale of a 15-year-old Vanessa Wise relationship with her 45-year-old English teacher, Jacob Strain, and the lasting impact it has on her life. It also examines themes of consent, coercion, and manipulation, and asks what it is that makes someone a victim. Just from that synopsis, I could tell obviously there are going to be themes of pedophilia, grooming. I would tread very lightly. Definitely please check all trigger warnings for this, because there are some very graphic depictions of everything I just mentioned. Going into this, I think I was very like, yeah, I know what this is about. Kind of like, I'm tough, I can handle it. But this book shook me to my core. The audiobook was fantastic. The narrator of the audiobook was amazing. As hard as this was to read, I think this is some required reading, in my opinion. I kind of thought I knew what I was getting into before reading this. I knew there would be very graphic scenes of abuse, but this is some of the most discomfort I've ever experienced while reading. And I found myself, while I was listening to it, like I would hear something that the teacher would say that would be so obviously grooming and so obviously manipulation. And it's like, you are manipulating a child, you sick son of a bitch. I would like sometimes be like listening to it at work, and I would be like outwardly like make noises like, ah, and like I feel like my coworkers were like, what the frick is Sam doing today? So yeah, maybe don't listen to it at work, or just like try to be better at hiding your sounds of disgust. I also thought that Vanessa was such an interesting character because she really challenges the notion of what a victim is. Is a victim still a victim if they're not the perfect victim? Which victims deserve justice and sympathy? Is it ethical for us as a society to have such high expectations of victims while our culture enables abusers? So yes, I would really, really recommend reading this one if you're able to, but as I said, please check trigger warnings before jumping into this one, because it was not an easy read. Next, I read a new series by Shuzo Oshimi, well, I guess new to me, which is Happiness. And I had previously read The Flowers of Evil, and I am currently reading and collecting Blood on the Tracks. I really love Blood on the Tracks, but I'm finding that his other series, they're not really hooking me as much as Blood on the Tracks did. So Happiness is about a Japanese high schooler, and he gets attacked by a girl in the middle of the night, and then subsequently starts to really crave human blood and becomes sensitive to sunlight. So obviously, this is a story about becoming a vampire. Basically, any Shuzo Oshimi is going to baseline be like 3 to 4 stars just on the art style alone. But I just feel like his other stories besides Blood on the Tracks haven't really captured my attention as much. The cover is obviously gorgeous. I mean, all of his art is amazing, but the story was just pretty okay for me. I'm also not extremely interested in vampires. I think that like vampires and zombies have just been like really overdone. I'm just kind of tired of reading about them. So I think that could also be why I wasn't as hooked by this. So yeah, I don't really feel like I absolutely must finish the series, but if I happen to like find them at my library, I might pick them up and might read them, but yeah, I'm not like dying to finish this series. So I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Mostly Dead Things by Kristen Arnett. Just a gorge cover, just a gorge paperback. we love. I had previously read With Teeth by her, really liked that. This follows a family following the unexpected death of the patriarch of the family. The daughter Jessalyn must step up and take over the family taxidermy business. But her family are all just like really weird, and like her mom comes in and like tries to make like these like lewd scenes of like the taxidermied animals and like different sex positions and stuff. And then the brother is just like super flaky. The brother was married to a woman named Bryn, who Jessalyn also happened to be in love with. But then Bryn left and just left him with the kids without saying a word. So the family is very dysfunctional. So this is a darkly funny family portrait, a peculiar, big-hearted look at love and loss and the ways we live through them together. Kristen Arnett's books are always really interesting to me because when I start reading them, like the first 30 to 40%, I'm like, I don't know if I'm like feeling that hooked, but it's like, it's really the characters that just compel me to keep reading. The way that she creates and constructs her characters, they all just feel so well thought out, really fleshed out, really complex, really nuanced, and just really interesting. They feel very real. So I find myself really empathizing with them. Like all of her characters in her books seem to be really mixed bags. Like they do really shitty things, but then they also have moments where it's like, oh, you're not like just a pure evil person. You're just like a complex human being who sometimes does things they regret. So yeah, most of her characters are not like the best people, but that's what makes them so endearing to me. I'll read anything Kristen Arnett writes, and I think you should too. I still think I liked With Teeth a little bit better, but this is still amazing. Obviously, I bought a physical copy, so I still highly recommend this. And it's also a really good summer read because it takes place in balmy Florida. So this was fun to read in the summer. I also recommend the audiobook if that's your thing, because that was pretty good. 3.75 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This was about a dystopian society in which a virus has contaminated all animals. So humans can no longer consume animal flesh, cows, chickens, pigs, any animals. Because if we do, we'll get infected and we'll die. So, because of the lack of animal flesh, cannibalism becomes legalized. And we follow Marcos, a human meat supplier who is navigating this dystopian society. He's conflicted by the new society and tortured by his own personal losses. So, let me just say respectfully, that's what I'm talking about. Definitely not a perfect book. I thought all of the commentary seemed like it was on the very edge of making a clear point, but it didn't. It seemed to lack follow through. Nonetheless, my eyeballs were glued to these pages. I was up into the wee hours reading this. And then there was a scene that unnerved me so much I had to put the book down. And then I slept really poorly and I think I had some nightmares. And then the ending was a god dang zinger. It got me so good. It got me so good. One of my fave horror books I think I've ever read. I am disturbed. I am shocked. And I am blissed the F out after reading this. Okay? Do you understand? Look at me. You get it? This was so good. This book made me a happy lass, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. You should read it. Next, I read a book that isn't normally my cup of tea, but it was one that I was just like, it was like, are you feeling lucky? On Libby, a really popular one that happened to just be available. And that is Finlay Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. So this is definitely more like contemporary, rompy fiction, but I enjoyed it because there are a lot of elements of mystery to it. Got a lot of girl bosses in it, like assassins. It's like girl bosses, assassins, mystery. I can get on board with that. So, okay, Sam, what is the synopsis? So Finlay Donovan is a young divorcee with 2 kids, an empty bank account, and a looming book deadline. So she's an author. When she's accidentally mistaken for a hitman in a Northern Virginia Panera Bread. So she's at Panera Bread discussing the synopsis for her upcoming book with her agent. And it's supposed to be like a suspense thriller romance. So the lady next to her hears her book synopsis and thinks that she's actually describing her day-to-day work. So she's like, yep, this lady's an assassin. I want to hire her to kill my husband. And that sounds, I guess, really serious, but the tone of this novel is very lighthearted, funny, silly, goofy. You know, there are definitely still times of tension, and like I said, it still is like a mystery, but it's sort of like, you know, if you've ever seen the movie Clue, that's a mystery, but it's not like, oh, this is so suspenseful. It is there's a lot of funny stuff that happens, and it's like I said, just lighthearted. So, yes, I love a good mystery / whodunit. This was a fun audiobook, definitely girl boss vibes. And yeah, this would be a great beach read. Great to be reading next to the pool. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Your House is on Fire, Your Children All Gone by Stefan. Kiesbye? I don't know. Kiesbye. So this was really good. This was really good. The village of Hemmersmoor is a place untouched by time and shrouded in superstition. There is the grand manor house, the old mill no one dares to mention. This is where 4 young friends come of age in an atmosphere thick with fear and suspicion. Their innocent games soon bring them face to face with the village's darkest secrets in this eerily dispassionate, astonishingly assured novel, evocative of Stephen King's classic short story, Children of the Corn, and infused with the spirit of the Brothers Grimm. All of the people in this town are so depraved, but what's most intriguing is how nonchalant they are about it. So that word in the synopsis where they say dispassionate, that's a really good word to describe these people, because they do all of these awful, awful, terrible things. But then they're just kind of like, the way they react to it is just kind of like, yeah, just another Tuesday. You know, it's like, okay. So the story opens with a group of childhood friends who, they were friends when they were kids. They're now adults. They're reuniting in their hometown. And then each chapter is told from the perspective of one of the friends from when they were children. I immediately found a used copy of this online after finishing it. It hasn't arrived yet, but it is currently en route to me because I loved this so much. It was so creepy. It was so weird. I love some evil-doing children. That's honestly the only good kind of child, in my opinion. The only complaint I have is I think that it felt like there were some times in the story where I felt like I was not fully grasping what was happening, or like I kind of felt like I was missing something. So I don't know if that was like a cultural reference, like a really German cultural reference that I was missing. But yeah, that's just me being pretty nitpicky, and I still gave it 4.75 out of 5 stars. And I think you should read it. Next, I read Come Closer by Sara Gran, and this was also really good. So I feel like I started out at the beginning of this video, I was kind of like, not a lot of good stuff happening, and then we've just been moving on up, baby. So, Come Closer by Sara Gran. Our main character, Amanda, is a successful architect with a loving marriage and home, but her life starts to unravel throughout the course of this novella. She begins to hear a strange tapping noise in her home, her personality begins to shift slightly, her behavior grows erratic, and she feels like she's losing control of her own life and behavior. Yep. So this is another story which relies on the trope of, is the character mentally ill, or is she actually possessed by a demon? Which, as I mentioned earlier, with Head Full of Ghosts, it's not always a hit for me. However, this book certainly lives up to the hype and is an easy 5 stars. Easy 5 stars. Like, this is the type of book where you read it and then you kind of have to go back and maybe like adjust some of the ratings of other books that you've read that you've rated really highly, because you're like, this was really good. Like, this is a 5. These are no longer 5s. You know what I mean? If you're even a slight horror fan, I recommend reading this. I think this would also be a good place to start for people who are curious about horror, but they don't read a lot of it, so they don't really know what they're going to be able to handle. This was a pretty mild, it was still really spooky, but a lot of it was like psychological horror, and again, sort of it's really heavily relying on that trope of, is she mentally ill or is she possessed? I think this would be good for sort of like people who are wanting to get more into the horror genre. It's also really short, so you could easily read this in one sitting. So yes, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, next I read a short story by fellow booktuber Mr. Morningstar, and the short story is called Aftermath. I don't really want to say too much about what it's about since it is a short story, but I believe this is a debut short story from Mr. Morningstar, and this is available to download on gumroad.com, so I'll include the link to that in the description. But this is a macabre story that follows a narrator who works in biohazard cleanup, and he specifically cleans up crime scenes. So he's really introverted and kind of just focuses on his work and his hobbies. Despite his tragic and gruesome life, he is able to find love. That's all I'm going to say. In terms of synopsis, I loved the descriptions of gore. The opening scene, the narrator, I think even the opening sentence, the narrator is describing chiseling dried brain matter off of a wall, and he likens it to like dried cement. And you might be thinking, I don't think brains would dry to be that hard, but I would like you all to know, I feed my cat Medusa wet food, and she normally eats most of it all right away. But if there's any that's left dried on, by the next morning, I have to take a knife and chisel it off the plate. I mean, again, it's not like dried cement, but I can't say the same for brains. So now, every time I feed my cat, I think of chiseling dried brains off of the wall. So you could safely say this story has definitely stuck with me, definitely disturbed me. So yes, I definitely recommend checking out the short story as well as his channel. He has a lot of really great book reviews and just insights in general about books on his channel. I will link both of those below if you are so interested. The last thing I read was an audiobook, so I listened to this, and that is Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. This is one that's been on my TBR for a while, and I've just been putting off because I just feel like I got kind of burnt out on thrillers for a while. But dang, this was a good thriller to come back with because this was pretty dark, pretty muffed up. The synopsis. More than 20 years ago, Claire and Lydia's teenage sister Julia vanished without a trace. The two women have not spoken since, and now their lives could not be more different. Claire is the glamorous trophy wife of an Atlanta millionaire. Lydia, a single mother, dates an ex-con and struggles to make ends meet. But neither has recovered from the horror and heartbreak of their shared loss, a devastating wound that's cruelly ripped open when Claire's husband is killed. That's a pretty, vague synopsis, and it, doesn't sound that spicy or interesting, but, I promise you it's spicy and interesting. Especially if you are the type of person who likes horror. Some thrillers feel a little bit too tame for me. This one was just it scratched that itch. It was so good. Yes, hot diggity dog, this was a fantastic thriller, okay? This was so dark and gory and just effed the F up. So effed up. Definitely check trigger warnings before reading this because there is a lot of, pretty much any awful thing you could think of doing to a human being it's done to a human being in this book. So a lot of graphic descriptions of murder. This is the kind of book that makes me sick to my stomach to think that there are sick psychos out there in the world who actually do this kind of thing to women. And I know it's a work of fiction, but it's I'm sure there's at least one person out there who is actively doing this kind of thing to people, I did listen to the audiobook and that was pretty good, but since it is a longer book, it was a 20-hour audiobook, so that kind of felt like a slog. That's just me being a baby. I definitely sped up the audiobook speed because I just got impatient and wanted to know what was going to happen. One nitpicky thing I'll say is that I didn't feel, I won't say I didn't like the ending, but I just didn't feel fully satisfied, I guess. And it kind of feels like the ending she chose is maybe the second best. There maybe could have been a better ending, but again, that's just me being nitpicky and wanting things to always be my way and how I like them. But I still gave it 5 out of 5 stars because this was seriously top tier thriller, guys. Top tier dark shit that I love. And I think you should check it out. Okay, that's everything I read in May and June. Thanks for watching. You want to see Medusa before we go? Here she is. The star. She is the moment. Okay. She puffed. Okay, bye. See you next time. Bye.